Growing up as a 90s kid, one of my favorite family films to play during the Halloween season was absolutely Hocus Pocus. And now, almost 30 years after the original film, Disney Plus has brought us a sequel, Hocus Pocus 2. But were they able to cast a spell on us a second time? What's going on, everybody, and welcome to my review of Hocus Pocus 2, playing right now on Disney Plus. The original film has always been one of my favorite Disney movies. I enjoy watching it almost every single year during the Halloween season, and I've even passed it on to my kids, and it's become one of their favorite movies. I think they've watched it at least 6 times just since October has started. And I was absolutely one of those people who for years have been wanting and asking for and very impatiently waiting for a sequel. And when they finally announced that a sequel was official and it was coming to Disney Plus within a year of the announcement, I was so excited, and every single piece that they have shown, whether it be trailers or teasers or the eventual first trailer, got me more and more excited because the Sanderson Sisters all looked like they did not miss a beat from that original film.
Lock up your children! Yes, Salem, we're back!
But of course, as we've seen numerous times, these long gestating and long delayed sequels to comedies and family classics don't always have the best track record and are extreme hit or miss. And so with that being in mind, I tried my best to stay very positive and optimistic about what this sequel could possibly be, even though it's been 30 years. And starting right off with the positives of Hocus Pocus 2, the Sanderson Sisters, thank God, are the best part of this movie. Just like the posters and the teaser and the trailer led me to believe, Kathy Najimy, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Bette Midler slipped right back into these roles, right back into those costumes, the mannerisms, the voices, as if the original was just like a movie from a couple of years ago.
What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I don't know, but I literally can't stop watching them. Isn't it better? The witches are back.
They really look like they had an absolute blast getting back into these characters, getting back with each other, going back into this world, and all of that translates on screen. From the very first moment that the Sanderson Sisters show up on screen in Hocus Pocus 2 and just go right into that little dance number about the witches are back, me, my wife, my kids, we were all smiling ear to ear, so happy, and the energy that they bring to this movie is absolutely the biggest treasure that it has in its bag.
I bet you're looking for the stage.
Always.
Especially Kathy Najimy. She really was the standout this time as Mary. All of the best jokes and the best moments of humor I felt came from her, and I love her character obviously in the first film, but I don't really remember her being as much of a standout in that one. And here, every single joke that she went for got a belly laugh out of me and my wife. I even enjoyed the little segment that opens up this movie that shows the Sanderson Sisters when they were kids, kind of giving a bit of an origin story, showing why they got into witchcraft, why they were kind of ostracized from Salem, and why they had a vendetta to take out on all of the citizens, even giving a little tiny bit of context between the eventual relationship between Winifred and Billy. All of that I really enjoyed as well. There's a bit of a thing that they set up in that opening that I don't think pays off in a way that I enjoyed, that I'll talk about more, but just the scene, the sequences in and of itself of an origin story for the Sanderson Sisters, I enjoyed seeing it. And speaking of Billy, having Doug Jones back as Billy Butcherson I thought was awesome as well, and the makeup effects on this guy was spot on. I mean, he looked identical to how he did in the first film. As soon as he busts out of the grave and has that dirty black ratty hair, it looks like they just put him in that grave and said, we'll see you in 30 years when we come back for the sequel, and then he rose out. I mean, it was just so perfect. And the way that he got back into that character is pretty much on par with what the 3 Sanderson Sisters did as well.
That's not 6 feet under.
I enjoyed some of the ways that they kind of brought the Hocus Pocus humor and the Hocus Pocus magic into the modern world, and they have these jokes about Walgreens and the potions and the kids' souls being inside of the lotions, and Kathy Najimy's character having to ride on Roombas, and even some other pieces of humor that I won't talk about specifically that I thought was effective. It felt natural, and it didn't feel like they were just forcing all this modern humor into it. And just like in the original film, how they were getting tricked all along the way with like car headlights and electricity and things that they weren't used to seeing in 1993 because they've been dead for centuries. they had that same style of humor bringing it into 2022. Moving on to the mixed aspects, there is this theme throughout the movie of sisterhood and taking care of your own and always being a tight-knit group, things like that, cherishing the people that you have around you. And I think they do a really good job at implementing that as kind of a mirror between our three protagonists and the Sanderson sisters. It's set up all the way from the opening flashback sequence of when they were kids, and it carries through all the way to the final few minutes of the movie. And I still have an issue with how they ended the film that I'll talk about in regards to this theme, but there was an interesting thing that they were trying to do there regarding having the protagonists be these kind of broken group of friends that have grown apart a little bit, at least one of them has grown apart, and needing to come back together, mend that friendship, regain that love and respect for each other to be able to triumph over the Sanderson sisters, who for 2 films now have been very tight-knit as sisters, but are certainly antagonistic towards each other, especially Winnie. And so the way that they went about it, I feel like they could have done it even better by just having it be so in stone that the Sanderson sisters should value those things, but really don't. I liked where they were going with it. I think for the most part, they had a good idea there to kind of give you a bit of a theme that leads to the eventual downfall of the movie's villains, but I think they eventually took it too far. And moving into my negatives with Hocus Pocus 2, where they took it too far for me is where they decided to end this movie on. I'm trying not to get into spoilers if you're worried about it, but essentially the way that they decide to bring that whole sisterhood theme to its full conclusion, they pull this extreme hard turn in the last few minutes of the movie where suddenly they try to do something to make Winifred and the Sanderson sisters almost like sympathetic or tragic or make you feel for them in some way. And I get that it's a Disney movie, and I get that they're not exactly new to doing this. I mean, as somebody that I was talking with pointed out, they tried to make somebody that wanted to skin 101 Dalmatians sympathetic at some point, so this is not new for Disney to do to their villains. They always want to have a bit of humanity and a bit of sympathy to them and not hard commit. But these are people that spent 2 whole movies trying to eat and kill children. They even open up the first film showing them succeed at killing a child. And so it's... No. I'm sorry. I love the Sanderson sisters. They're the reason we're here. They're the reason we're excited for this movie, and they're absolute icons in my opinion, but they're not good guys in any way, shape, or form. They're not sympathetic. They're not somebody that I want to try to have any kind of remorseful feelings towards. They deserve to be vanquished. They deserve to remain 100% evil, which they have always been. I don't know if I'm on an island with that. My wife seemed to really respond to what they were doing. She was like, "Oh, I'm gonna cry. I'm so sad. What's going on?" And I'm like, what the hell are they doing? This is weird. But it just left the movie in a really odd place for me, to where it just felt so out of nowhere and it felt so forced. And again, I get what they were doing narratively. I get what they were trying to do with tying that theme back in. I get it on paper, but these are child killers. We haven't forgotten that. Moving beyond that, the movie just doesn't quite have the same magic as the first film. I mean, old Disney just hits different than new Disney. I mean, and maybe that's just my generation. Maybe there's some kids, some younger people that are going to watch this that might even prefer this or think it's as good as the original, or might like this and dislike the original. I mean, I'm sure there's a variety of opinions out there. But for somebody that grew up in the 90s and I was raised on that era of Disney, the newer Disney just, it tends to lean a little bit more into some of the sillier humor, always trying to have a very modern message or some kind of a modern thing thrown in there, which sometimes is good. Sometimes it feels like that kind of took over the story writing a bit. Not saying that it does here, but overall, new Disney, when I watch it, there's just no movies that hit me the same the way that they did back in the 80s and 90s. And one of the big missing elements for this sequel to me is that I didn't really care for any of the protagonist characters here. It's not that they're bad characters or they're badly performed, it's just they're not as interesting. They're not as well written. I'm not gonna walk away from this movie remembering any of the protagonists or the side characters. I'm gonna remember the Sanderson sisters, I'm gonna remember Billy. I can tell you the characters of Max and Allison and Danny from the first film because they pop and they have some interesting dynamics with each other. Here, I couldn't even tell you any of the main characters' names, and I just watched this movie yesterday. I also didn't really understand what they were trying to do in the lore here with actually having one of the protagonists be able to have magic, like she gets her witchy powers at 16, and they have this thing to where Winifred has always had powers, but suddenly the other two get powers in this one, which I guess I never realized that she was the only one shooting lightning in the first film, but they don't really explain how Winifred got those powers if she wasn't powerful in the opening. She was just human that got this magical book, and I always assumed that's where she got all of her evil powers from. So establishing that other people throughout the world also have powers makes it a little bit weird when nobody has ever mentioned that in either of these two movies. It's just Winifred and this main chick. And finally, the overall story of the movie I didn't think was all that interesting as well. I mean, you essentially have these three girls that are tricked into bringing back the Sanderson sisters by this really obsessed fan. And then from there, the Sanderson sisters are just trying to kill the guy that looks like the mayor from the 1700s. And that's the main plot of the movie until the last 20 minutes when she's like, okay, well, to hell with that guy. I just want to be all powerful. And so it doesn't really feel like there's a solid story that this is all built upon. It's all just kind of resting on nostalgia. It's all resting on the magic of these characters coming back, which there's a lot of magic there. But it just doesn't really have anything new narratively to merit bringing them back, which is disappointing when they've had 30 years to come up with a good idea. And so by the end of it, it didn't feel like they had like this great script or some really inspired idea that finally led them to greenlight this long-awaited sequel. It feels more like they just wanted more content to fill out Disney Plus with to try to sell you a subscription. Which, to be honest, is how I feel about a lot of what Disney's been doing lately. Whether it's Star Wars, MCU, and now even these other classic Disney properties like Hocus Pocus, it just kind of feels a little bit more like products being sold to me versus really inspired creativity, filmmakers, screenwriters, directors coming together to bring an idea that they're passionate about. I just don't feel that from Disney anymore, and I think that's the magic that's missing here. So overall, guys, I enjoyed this enough. This is a sequel that I certainly will not mind watching back to back with the first film every single October, but it doesn't come anywhere close to the magic of that first film for me, but that might just be my generation. I loved seeing the Sanderson sisters back. I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually get a third film if this does succeed, and I'll try to give that one some hope as well, but they really missed the mark in the narrative and the protagonists for me personally. Well, that's it for me, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for the rest of my 2022 new release reviews, and I'm also going to put an older video up here, top 10 movies to watch on Halloween, of which Hocus Pocus is on that list. So please check all those out, like and share this video, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.